Ava stood in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the hem of her dress, her heart fluttering in her chest. It was their anniversary, the fourth one to be exact, and she had spent the entire week planning the perfect evening. The restaurant was booked, the candles set up in their apartment, and she even picked out a gift she knew Ethan would love, a leather jacket, just like the one he'd been eyeing for months. The soft hum of her phone vibrating on the countertop broke her from her thoughts. It was a text from Ethan. "I'll be home a little late, but I'll make it up to you. Don't worry, I'll be there soon. Love you." A smile tugged at Ava's lips as she read it. He always had a way with words, making her feel like the center of his universe. His sweet gestures, his thoughtful nature, it was why she had fallen so deeply in love with him. This evening was supposed to be a celebration of that love. She gave herself one last look, her reflection confirming what she already knew. She was ready. The evening would be perfect. She felt a lightness in her chest as she adjusted the strap of her heels and walked to the living room to finish setting things up. The apartment was filled with the sweet scent of vanilla and cinnamon, a candlelit ambience casting a warm glow on the walls. As she arranged the plates, she found herself replaying the memories of the last few years. The way Ethan had held her when she was upset, the laughter they shared over wine late into the night, the quiet moments that felt like home. Everything had felt so right, but a faint whisper at the back of her mind kept nagging at her. She couldn't place it, but something felt off. It was a feeling she had tried to ignore for a few days now. Ethan had seemed distant lately, a little more distracted than usual, but she brushed it off. Work had been stressful for him, and she knew how much he cared. This was just a phase. He'd snap out of it. But now, as she set the table and prepared for the night ahead, that nagging feeling grew. The doubt was faint, barely a whisper, but it felt persistent. The sound of the door opening startled her. She turned quickly, her heart leaping. Ethan stepped inside, his tall frame filling the doorway, his eyes softening when he saw her. "Wow," he murmured, his gaze taking in her outfit. "You look stunning, as always." Ava smiled, her nerves calming slightly. "I'm glad you're here. I've got everything ready." Ethan gave a half smile, walking over to her. He kissed her lightly on the cheek, but there was something about his touch that felt different, hesitant, almost reluctant. She pushed the thought away, telling herself she was being ridiculous. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said, shrugging off his coat and hanging it on the hook by the door. "Work ran late, but I'll make it up to you tonight." Ava nodded, trying to ignore the chill creeping up her spine. He had been saying that a lot lately. "I'll make it up to you," as if he had been falling short, constantly apologizing for something. But for what? "Come on, sit down," she urged, pulling out the chair at the table. "I made your favorite." As they sat down to dinner, the conversation flowed easily at first, just like it always did. Ava felt herself relaxing into the comfort of their usual routine. They laughed about work, joked about their mutual love for cheesy action movies, and reminisced about the places they had traveled together. But even as the night unfolded, Ava couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. Ethan's laughter didn't quite reach his eyes, and his gaze kept drifting to his phone, tucked casually beside his plate. His fingers would hover over it for a moment before he would quickly look away, as if catching himself. Ava paused mid-bite, watching him. She had never been one to snoop, but tonight the unease inside her was too strong to ignore. There was something in his behavior she couldn't place, something unfamiliar. "Ethan," she began, trying to keep her tone casual, "is everything okay? You've seemed a little off lately." He froze for a moment, his fork halfway to his mouth, and for the briefest second, a flicker of something she couldn't quite read flashed in his eyes. It was gone in an instant, replaced by a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, everything's fine," he said quickly, setting his fork down. "Just work stuff, you know how it is. Nothing to worry about." Ava nodded, though she wasn't entirely convinced. She had heard that excuse 1,000 times, but tonight, something about it didn't sit right with her. She wanted to push further, ask him about the growing distance between them, but she stopped herself. It was their anniversary. She didn't want to ruin the night. Still, as she looked at him across the table, a small voice inside her whispered that this night wasn't going to be as perfect as she had hoped, and she had no idea just how right she was. The night continued, but the warmth Ava had initially felt began to wane as subtle unease crept in. Ethan's words were soft, his gestures still affectionate, but there was a tension in the air, one she couldn't shake. It wasn't obvious, not to anyone else, but to her, the woman who had known him better than anyone, it was unmistakable. After dinner, they moved to the couch to watch a movie. Ethan was scrolling through his phone, barely paying attention to the film, and his fingers would occasionally tap the screen too quickly, almost as if he were checking messages or notifications he didn't want her to see. Ava caught herself glancing at him, studying his profile in the dim light, her mind racing to make sense of the distance she felt. She tried to push the thoughts away. It was their anniversary. She wanted to enjoy the evening, to celebrate their time together, but that quiet nagging feeling wouldn't let her. She wasn't the type to overthink things, but tonight felt different. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice hesitant as she broke the silence. "Are you okay? I feel like, I don't know, you've seemed distant for a while now." He looked up from his phone, meeting her eyes for the first time in hours. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something Ava couldn't name, that made her stomach churn. "I'm fine," he replied quickly, his voice a little too sharp. He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just tired, work late nights, same old story." Ava nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed him. She had heard this excuse so many times before, and it always felt like an easy way out. Ethan's job had always been demanding, but lately, it seemed to consume him more than ever. She thought about how many nights he'd come home late, how many weekends he'd canceled plans with her to take on more work, how many promises he had made that had never quite come through. But tonight, something felt more off than usual. Maybe it was the way he kept checking his phone, or how he had been so distracted during dinner. She thought back to their conversation earlier in the day, when he had seemed distant on the phone, his voice clipped and hurried. It was as if he couldn't be bothered to give her his full attention. "Ethan," she said again, her voice trembling slightly, "I don't mean to sound paranoid, but something doesn't feel right. Have you been seeing someone else?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. Ava winced, realizing how bold it sounded, but the question had been eating at her for days. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest as she waited for his response. For a long moment, there was silence. Ethan's eyes flickered to hers, then quickly away, and his face tightened. He was trying to keep his composure, but Ava could tell she had caught him off guard. His fingers paused mid-scroll on his phone. "What?" His voice was soft, almost amused. "What are you talking about, Ava? Where is this coming from?" "I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. "I just feel like you've been pulling away. You've been acting strange, like there's someone or something else." Ethan's gaze shifted again, and for the briefest moment, Ava saw something in his eyes, something that made her stomach drop. It was guilt. She recognized it in an instant. His eyes darted to his phone once more, as if looking for a way to deflect her question. "I'm not seeing anyone else, Ava. I swear," he said quickly, his voice too smooth. The words were reassuring, but Ava's instincts screamed at her that something wasn't right. The tension hung heavy in the air as Ava searched his face, trying to read the man she had loved for so long. Ethan had always been open with her, his expressions telling her everything she needed to know, but now she couldn't quite reach him. There was a wall between them, and it was growing by the second. "Okay," she said, though she didn't believe him. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I guess I'm just imagining things." Ethan seemed to relax slightly, relieved that the moment had passed. "Yeah," he muttered, "you're just overthinking it. Let's just enjoy the evening, all right?" But Ava wasn't convinced. The quiet doubt still gnawed at her. There was something he wasn't telling her. And deep down, she knew she wasn't imagining it. The night dragged on, but the cracks in Ava's trust had deepened. Ethan's attempt to brush off her concern left her with a sinking feeling in her stomach. They had moved to the bedroom, both of them pretending as if nothing had happened, but the air between them had shifted, become thicker, harder to breathe. Ava had tried to ignore it, curling up in bed beside Ethan, but the doubt gnawed at her. Her mind kept replaying the way he'd acted, the way his gaze had flickered. The subtle avoidance, the way he had rushed to dismiss her questions. She knew him too well. She should have known something was wrong. As Ethan lay beside her, his breathing slow and even, Ava pretended to fall asleep. She kept her eyes closed, but her mind was wide awake, racing. She had been through too much with Ethan to let this slide, especially when her gut was screaming that something wasn't right. For hours, she lay there, waiting for him to fall into a deeper sleep. Finally, when his breathing became rhythmic, she slowly pulled herself out of bed and tiptoed across the room to his dresser. It was a feeling she couldn't shake, the need to know, the need for some kind of confirmation. She knew it was a betrayal of trust, but the more she thought about it, the more it felt like the only way she could confront this growing uncertainty. Her hands were shaking as she slid open the drawer. There was a notebook at the bottom, but she bypassed it, reaching for his phone instead. He had left it on the nightstand earlier that evening. She hesitated, glancing back at him. His face was turned away from her, peaceful in his sleep, but Ava knew she couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling anymore. With one final glance over her shoulder, she grabbed his phone. It felt wrong, like stepping over a boundary she never thought she'd cross. But she needed to know. She needed to see if she was just imagining things or if the truth was staring her in the face. The screen lit up, and she quickly unlocked it with the passcode she had known for years. It only took a few seconds for her heart to start pounding in her chest as she scrolled through his messages. There was nothing at first, just a few work-related texts, some from his friends, a couple from his family. But then her eyes landed on a thread of messages with a contact she didn't recognize. The name was saved as Stella. Her breath hitched. She didn't want to believe it, but her fingers trembled as she clicked open the conversation. The messages were recent, dating back to a few days ago. Stella, I miss you. Last night was perfect, can't wait to see you again. Ethan, me too. Let's make it happen again soon. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. The messages kept going, increasingly intimate, even flirtatious. As her eyes scanned them, a sick realization settled in her stomach. This wasn't just a fling, this was an affair. Ethan had been seeing someone else for weeks, maybe longer. The texts were filled with terms of endearment, plans to meet up, and even talk about secret trips. Ava's hands were shaking now, but she couldn't stop reading. The deeper she dove into the thread, the clearer it became that Ethan had been lying to her for a long time. Stella, what about Ava? Does she suspect anything? Ethan, no, she has no idea. I've been careful. She's not even close to figuring it out. Ava felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Careful. He had been careful. Ethan had been so careful with her, so careful with his lies. He had fooled her for so long, and she had been so blind to the truth. Her fingers hovered over the phone, the temptation to confront him right then and there almost overwhelming. But something inside her held her back. She couldn't confront him in the dead of night, in the quiet of their shared bedroom. It would destroy everything they had built together, and part of her wasn't ready to face the devastation yet. Instead, she dropped the phone back onto the nightstand and walked quietly to the bathroom, her mind racing. Her legs felt weak beneath her as she leaned against the sink, her reflection in the mirror barely recognizable. The woman staring back at her was someone she no longer recognized. She wasn't the woman who had trusted, who had believed in the man she loved. No, this was someone else, someone who had just seen the truth. Ava's hands gripped the edge of the sink as she closed her eyes, taking a few steadying breaths. She couldn't cry now. She wouldn't cry now. She needed clarity, not emotion. She needed strength. When she walked back into the bedroom, Ethan was still asleep, oblivious to the fact that his world was about to collapse. Ava stood there for a long time, staring at him, at the man she thought she knew. The man she had loved with all her heart. But as she stared down at him, a bitter resolve began to take root inside her. She had loved him, but she wouldn't let him destroy her any longer. Tomorrow, everything would change. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows across the bedroom. Ava had hardly slept. The weight of what she had discovered hung over her like a dark cloud, and she couldn't push the image of the messages from her mind. It felt like her world had shattered in the span of a few minutes, and everything that had once been solid and real now seemed like a fragile illusion. She watched Ethan as he slept, his chest rising and falling steadily. For a moment, she considered waking him, confronting him right then and there. But something inside her told her that wasn't the way. The anger that had simmered inside her the night before was still there, but there was something else, a calm, calculated rage that had taken root in her heart. This wasn't just about confronting him. This was about regaining control. She slipped out of bed and walked quietly into the kitchen, her footsteps light on the hardwood floor. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the room in pale hues of pink and orange. She poured herself a cup of coffee, the aroma comforting but no longer enough to calm the storm inside her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a text from her best friend, Olivia. Olivia, are you okay? You seemed off last night. Let me know if you need to talk. Ava stared at the message for a moment, unsure of how to respond. She couldn't talk to Olivia yet, not about this. Not when everything was still raw, when she hadn't even fully processed what had happened. The betrayal was too fresh, too painful. Instead, Ava typed a quick reply, trying to sound normal. I'm fine, just tired. I'll talk to you later. She put the phone down, her fingers tapping restlessly on the mug. What was she supposed to do now? Should she confront him immediately, demand answers? Or should she wait, let him stew in his guilt before she tore everything apart? Ava knew she couldn't keep pretending. The silence, the lies, it had all gone on long enough. She needed to hear him admit it. She needed him to face the reality of what he had done. The decision made, Ava took a deep breath and walked back to the bedroom. Ethan was still asleep, his face peaceful and unaware. As she stood there, staring at him, a deep, unsettling feeling washed over her. This wasn't just about the affair. It was about everything that had led up to it, the secrets, the broken promises, the little things that she had ignored or brushed off for the sake of keeping the peace. She had let him get away with too much. She wasn't going to let him do that anymore. Ethan stirred slightly as she approached the bed, but he didn't wake up. Ava leaned over, her fingers brushing the side of his face as she gently shook his shoulder. "Ethan," she said, her voice low but firm. "Wake up." His eyes fluttered open, groggy from sleep. He blinked a few times before focusing on her face, and for a split second, Ava saw something in his eyes, a flicker of guilt that quickly disappeared, replaced by his usual charm. "Hey, babe," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "What's going on?" Ava didn't answer him immediately. She didn't need to. She just stood there, watching him, the weight of her discovery pressing down on her chest. He was still trying to act as if everything was normal. The man who had been lying to her for weeks, the man who had betrayed her in the most intimate way, was still trying to pass off his guilt as nothing more than a casual, tired smile. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself before she spoke. "Ethan," she began, her voice steady but cold. "I know about her." The words hung in the air like a thick fog. Ethan's face froze, his eyes widening slightly. The color drained from his face, and for a brief moment, Ava saw the man she had loved, the man who had been so carefully constructing this web of lies, finally show a crack in his facade. What are you talking about?" he stammered, trying to play it off, but his voice was tight. Ava crossed her arms, standing tall. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but her resolve was stronger than the fear that had tried to take over. She had known him for years, she knew when he was lying. And she knew that in that moment, he was too far gone to hide it any longer. "I saw the texts, Ethan," she said, each word slicing through the tension. "I saw everything. Stella, she's not just a friend, is she?" He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His face twisted in a mix of panic and disbelief, but Ava didn't give him the chance to weasel his way out of this. She had already heard enough, seen enough. "You've been seeing her behind my back for God knows how long, haven't you?" Her voice grew louder, more piercing. "How long, Ethan? How long have you been lying to me?" He finally sat up in bed, running a hand through his hair, his gaze shifting nervously. "Ava, please, it's not like that." "I don't," she snapped. "Don't you dare try to justify it. You've been cheating on me, Ethan. You've been betraying me for weeks, maybe longer. And all this time, you've been pretending like nothing's wrong. Well, guess what? I know everything." Ethan was silent for a moment, his face a mask of guilt and shame. He opened his mouth to speak, but Ava cut him off before he could say another word. "I trusted you," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. "I loved you, and you chose her over me." The words stung more than she could have ever imagined. This wasn't just about the affair. It was about the love she had given him, the trust she had placed in him, and the promises he had broken. And now, standing here in front of him, she realized that no apology could ever undo what he had done. Ava turned on her heel, walking away from the bed. She didn't know what she was going to do next, but one thing was clear. Everything had changed. This was the end. Ava didn't know where to go, what to do next. Her mind was spinning, her emotions in turmoil. The confrontation with Ethan had been a shock to both of them, but it wasn't enough. The words had been said, the betrayal exposed, but nothing felt settled. Nothing felt real. She paced around the apartment, her fingers trembling as she tried to focus on something, anything, to ground herself. The familiar hum of the coffee machine, the soft light of morning spilling through the window, none of it felt like home anymore. It was just a space now, a hollow place where memories of love had been turned into something much darker. The sound of Ethan's footsteps behind her broke through the fog in her mind. She didn't need to turn around to know he was following her, that he was trying to fix things with words that meant nothing anymore. "Ava, please, just listen." She spun on her heel, cutting him off with a sharp gesture. "Don't," she said, her voice steady but cold. "Don't try to talk your way out of this. I don't want to hear your excuses. You've had plenty of time to be honest with me, but instead, you've been lying." "For weeks, Ethan, weeks." He was standing too close now, his eyes wide with desperation. "I'm sorry, okay? I made a mistake. I shouldn't have let it go this far. It wasn't—" "It was what?" Ava interrupted, her voice rising. "It wasn't serious. Was it just a fling? Or was I just a placeholder while you figured out what you really wanted?" She could feel her heart racing in her chest, but the anger, the rage, was drowning out the hurt. He had lied to her, betrayed her, and now he was trying to make it sound like it was some small mistake. His face twisted in guilt, his hands coming up in a defensive motion. "Ava, I didn't mean for it to happen. I don't even know how it did. It was a mistake, one I regret deeply. I love you, you know I do. Ava's laugh was bitter, harsh. Love me? You don't love me, Ethan. If you did, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have slept with someone else behind my back. She shook her head, the tears that had been threatening to fall suddenly too much to hold back. You broke me, and I don't know if I can ever forgive you for that. Ethan took a step toward her, but she held her hand up, stopping him in his tracks. I'm done, she said, the finality of the words settling in the space between them. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. I don't even know who you are anymore. He looked at her with wide, pleading eyes, and Ava could see the raw fear in them, the fear of losing her. But there was no turning back now. The damage had been done, and as much as it hurt, Ava knew there was no way to repair the trust that had been shattered. I'll leave, she whispered, her voice breaking. I need to be alone. Please just let me go. For a moment, there was silence, and Ava thought Ethan might argue. But he didn't. Instead, he stood there, defeated, his shoulders slumping as he nodded, the fight gone from him. Okay, he said softly, the sorrow in his voice unmistakable. If that's what you need. Ava didn't look back as she grabbed her purse and headed for the door. The weight of the decision was pressing down on her, but she didn't feel relief, not yet. The decision had been made, but the pain of it was still there, lodged in her chest. She didn't know where she was going. Her feet carried her aimlessly down the streets, her mind still reeling from the conversation. The sun had risen higher, and the city was coming to life around her, but it all felt distant, as though she were looking at it through a foggy window. Her phone buzzed again, and this time she didn't bother to check the message. She knew it was Ethan. He had sent a few texts already, but she couldn't bring herself to read them. What was there left to say? The damage had been done. Her mind kept drifting back to the words she had read on his phone, Stella. She couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way Ethan had responded to her messages with such ease, such care. There was no remorse in those texts, no guilt. There was only the thrill of secrecy, the rush of an affair, and Ava was left to pick up the pieces. After hours of walking, her feet sore and her head heavy with thoughts, Ava finally found herself at the park. The same park where she and Ethan had spent hours in the early days of their relationship, talking about everything and nothing. It had felt like home back then, a safe place. Now, it felt like a reminder of everything she had lost. She sat on a bench, her fingers clenched around her purse. The air was crisp, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. But all Ava could hear was the pounding of her own heart, the silence that stretched out in the spaces between her thoughts. A few people passed by, some jogging, others walking dogs, but none of them noticed her. She was just another face in the crowd, another woman nursing her wounds in private. And then, as if the universe had heard her silent plea for an answer, a familiar voice broke through the noise of her thoughts. Ava, she looked up, startled, and saw Olivia standing in front of her. What are you doing here? Ava asked, wiping her face quickly to hide the tears that had begun to fall. I could ask you the same thing, Olivia said gently, sitting down beside her. You didn't respond to my texts, and I was getting worried. Ava sniffled, trying to smile but failing. I just needed some space. Olivia was quiet for a moment before speaking softly. You don't have to go through this alone, you know, you have me, you always have me. Ava nodded, the weight of her emotions finally crashing over her. She turned to her best friend, the only person who truly understood her. He cheated on me, Liv, she whispered. He betrayed me in the worst way possible. Olivia's eyes softened as she reached over to take Ava's hand. I know, and I'm so sorry you're going through this, but you're strong, Ava, and you're going to get through this. Whatever happens, you don't have to do it alone. Ava didn't have the strength to speak. She simply nodded, leaning into Olivia for support, for the first time feeling like she wasn't entirely alone in her pain. Ava didn't sleep much that night. Olivia had stayed with her, making sure she ate, making sure she didn't let herself drown in the sadness that threatened to consume her. But even with her best friend by her side, the loneliness of betrayal loomed large. The silence in her apartment felt deafening now. What had once been a space filled with laughter and shared memories was now a cold, hollow shell. The remnants of her relationship with Ethan lay scattered in fragments, photos on the walls, the scent of his cologne still lingering in the air, and the faint echo of his voice in every corner of the room. Ava sat on the couch, the same one where they had shared countless nights, talking about their future. She stared blankly at the television, the noise from the show an unwanted distraction from her thoughts. The door to the bedroom was closed, but she knew Ethan's things were still in there. His clothes, his shoes, his life. And for a fleeting moment, Ava wondered what it would be like to just pack up his things, throw them out the window, and never look back. But she couldn't bring herself to do it. Not yet. not when the weight of everything was still too raw. The phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling Ava out of her trance. She reached for it, half hoping it was a message from Olivia, maybe something to distract her, to pull her back from the abyss. But it wasn't Olivia, it was Ethan. His name flashed across the screen, and Ava felt a chill run through her. She hadn't responded to his texts all day, but part of her had been waiting for this moment. The moment he would try to make it right, or at least try to explain himself. The message was simple, but the words hit her like a punch to the stomach. "I'm sorry, Ava. I'll do anything to make this right. Please don't leave me. I love you." Ava stared at the screen, her heart pounding in her chest. Part of her wanted to believe him, to cling to the remnants of what they had. She wanted to believe that his love for her was enough to make up for the betrayal. But the reality was sinking in, heavier than ever. His apology felt empty. He hadn't just betrayed her once, he had done it repeatedly. And now, he was trying to fix things with words that couldn't undo the damage. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. She could reply. She could ask him to come over to try to talk things through, to see if they could salvage what was left of their relationship. But as she thought about it, she realized she wasn't sure if she wanted to anymore. Ava shook her head, tears brimming at the corners of her eyes. She couldn't keep running in circles. She couldn't keep hoping that he would change, that he would suddenly realize what he had lost. She had given him so many chances, and this was the end. She typed back the only thing that made sense. "I need space. I need to think." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then tossed the phone back onto the couch as if it had burned her. Her heart was breaking all over again, but this time there was something different, something stronger. This time, she wasn't going to let him win. She wasn't going to let him manipulate her into staying in a relationship that had broken her. The next few days felt like a blur. Ava tried to keep busy going to work, meeting up with Olivia, focusing on the things she could control. But everywhere she turned, memories of Ethan haunted her. She ran into an old friend at the grocery store, someone who had known her and Ethan as a couple, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of the pity in their eyes. People didn't know what had happened, but they could tell something was wrong. She could see it in their expressions, their nervous glances. But what hurt the most was that Ethan hadn't even tried to reach out again. He hadn't sent any more texts, no phone calls, no letters. Nothing. At first, Ava thought maybe he was respecting her space. But as the days passed, she realized it wasn't that simple. Ethan wasn't trying to fix things. He wasn't trying to win her back. He was moving on. Ava had known it was coming, but it still hit her like a ton of bricks. She had been the one left behind, the one who had been discarded when she wasn't needed anymore. And now, Ethan was just gone. It wasn't just the affair, it was everything that had led to it. The quiet disinterest, the unspoken resentment, the cracks in their relationship that she had been too scared to face until now. She had been holding on to the idea of their love, but the reality was far different. One evening, Olivia called, sounding worried. "Ava, are you okay? You've been distant lately." Ava swallowed hard, not trusting herself to speak at first. She had spent so much time trying to hold it all together, but she was unraveling thread by thread. "I don't know, Liv," Ava admitted softly. "I don't know if I can keep doing this. I feel like I've lost everything." Olivia was quiet for a moment, then she spoke with gentle determination. "You haven't lost everything, Ava. You still have yourself. And I know it's hard, but you'll get through this. You're stronger than you think." The words didn't fix the pain. They didn't make the emptiness go away. But they were a small light in the darkness, a reminder that she wasn't completely alone. Ava didn't know what her next step was, but for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Maybe, just maybe, she would find herself again, stronger, wiser, and ready to move forward. Ava spent the following week in a haze, the days blending together in a series of work meetings, brief encounters with Olivia, and moments of quiet solitude. The first few days without Ethan were the hardest. She would wake up expecting to hear his voice, the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, but the silence was suffocating. His absence seemed to hang in every room, in every corner of the apartment that used to feel like home. But something was changing inside her. She was beginning to realize that as much as it hurt, she didn't need Ethan anymore. She didn't need someone who would betray her trust, someone who would allow her to believe in a love that wasn't real. At work, her coworkers noticed the difference in her energy. She had always been a quiet person, the type to keep to herself, but now there was a newfound sense of resolve in her. She smiled more easily, laughed when appropriate, and seemed more grounded than she had in months. It wasn't that she was fine, it was that she was starting to find herself again. Olivia, as always, was there for her, though Ava couldn't deny that their roles had shifted. Before, she had been the one offering emotional support, but now, Olivia was the one who had to remind Ava of her worth. One afternoon, after work, Olivia invited Ava to dinner at a new restaurant she had been raving about. The idea of getting out of her apartment, of stepping into the world again, felt both liberating and terrifying, but Ava agreed. She needed to start moving forward. They sat in a cozy booth, the soft clink of silverware and the hum of conversation in the background. Ava ordered a glass of wine, her first in what felt like weeks, and she felt a little lighter with each sip. For the first time in days, she felt something resembling peace. "You know," Olivia said, glancing at Ava with a thoughtful look, "I think you're starting to get back to yourself. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." Ava smiled faintly, swirling the wine in her glass. "I'm just trying to get through each day, you know?" Olivia nodded. "I get it, but I also know you're not the type to give up. You never have been." Ava's gaze wandered for a moment, her thoughts drifting to Ethan, to the way he had looked when she had left. He had seemed broken, desperate for her forgiveness, but there had been no turning back. There was no way to unsee the truth, and there was no way to undo the damage. Ava's hand tightened around the glass, the sudden rush of emotion almost overwhelming her. She had loved Ethan so completely, so deeply, but it wasn't enough to make up for the betrayal. She had given him everything she had, only to watch him throw it away. But she wasn't going to let him win. She wasn't going to let him define her anymore. "I don't know what's next," Ava said softly, looking at Olivia, "but I know it has to be something better than what I had." Olivia reached across the table, placing her hand over Ava's in a gesture of support. "It will be. You deserve so much more than what he gave you, Ava. You deserve someone who sees you, who appreciates you. And I'm going to be here every step of the way while you find that person. Whether it's someone else or just yourself, you deserve happiness." The sincerity in Olivia's words struck Ava in a way she hadn't expected. For so long, she had relied on others for her sense of worth, but maybe now it was time to focus on herself. That night, after dinner, Ava walked home slowly, the streets quiet under the cool night air. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she took it out, seeing that she had received a message from her mom. "I know things have been tough lately, but remember you have a family who loves you, Ava. We're here for you, no matter what." A lump formed in Ava's throat. She hadn't realized how much she had withdrawn from everyone, her mom, her friends, her colleagues, but they had always been there and they always would be. It wasn't just Olivia who had her back. She had a network of people who cared about her, people who wanted her to heal, even if she hadn't fully understood that before. That night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Ava felt a shift. It wasn't immediate and it wasn't perfect, but she could feel the weight of her sadness beginning to lift. It wasn't because of Ethan's absence, it was because she was finally starting to understand that she was enough. She didn't need his validation. She didn't need his love to feel whole. The road ahead would be long, and there would be days when she wanted to call him, to forgive him and go back to the way things were. But she knew better now. She knew she couldn't go back. The following weekend, Ava decided to take a break from her usual routine. She rented a small cabin by the lake, somewhere quiet, somewhere she could clear her head. The decision to go was spontaneous, but Ava needed to be alone. She needed time to reflect and to think about her future, away from the constant reminder of Ethan and the life she thought they were going to build. The cabin was small but charming, with a wooden deck that overlooked the water. The air was crisp and the stillness of the lake calmed her racing thoughts. Ava spent her days by the water, reading, journaling, and simply being present in the moment. It was exactly what she needed. One evening, as she sat on the deck watching the sunset, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Ethan. "I miss you. Please don't shut me out completely. I know I've hurt you, but I still love you." Ava stared at the message for a long time, her heart pounding. Part of her wanted to respond, wanted to open the door to the possibility of reconciliation. But another part of her, the stronger part, knew that she had to let go. She didn't respond to the message. Instead, she tucked her phone back into her bag and turned her attention back to the peaceful lake. She was no longer waiting for someone else to define her happiness. She had already started to find it within herself. Ava's journey wasn't over. There would still be days when the ache of betrayal resurfaced, days when she questioned her decision, but she knew now that she was strong enough to handle whatever came her way. And she wasn't alone. She had her friends, her family, and most importantly, herself. And that, she realized, was enough. The weeks following Ava's time at the cabin were a blur of change. She had returned to her apartment, but it no longer felt like the same place. It was as though a weight had been lifted, and everything felt Lighter, the memories of Ethan, though painful, no longer had the power to haunt her at every turn. She focused on her work, throwing herself into her projects with a renewed sense of purpose. It was a welcome distraction, but it was more than that. For the first time in a long time, Ava was not just going through the motions. She was thriving. Olivia, ever the supportive friend, noticed the transformation. "I've never seen you this." "At peace," she said one afternoon as they sat in their favorite cafe, sipping coffee. "You seem different, in a good way." Ava smiled softly. "I think I'm finally starting to figure things out. I don't need to keep looking back at what I lost. It's time to move forward." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "So, does that mean you're ready to put yourself out there again?" Ava hesitated, the idea of dating someone else still feeling like a distant thought. "I don't know. I think I'm still figuring out who I am without him. It's not about finding someone new right now. It's about finding me again." "I get it," Olivia said, her tone understanding. "But just so you know, I've got your back if you ever decide you're ready for the next chapter. You deserve someone who will treat you right." Ava's heart warmed at her friend's unwavering support. "Thank you, Liv. You've been here for me through all of this, and I don't know what I would have done without you." "Anytime," Olivia said with a grin. "But seriously, don't let the past hold you back. You've got a lot of love to give, and someone out there will be lucky to receive it when you're ready." The conversation lingered with Ava long after they parted ways. It wasn't that she had completely forgotten about Ethan or erased the pain of what had happened, but she had come to a place of acceptance. The past was just that, the past, and she was learning how to let go. A few weeks later, Ava found herself in a new place, a dinner party hosted by one of her coworkers, Kate. It had been a last-minute invitation, and Ava wasn't sure she was in the mood for socializing, but Olivia had practically insisted she go. "You need to get out there, have some fun. There's more to life than work, you know?" Ava had reluctantly agreed, figuring it would be a low-key evening. As she entered Kate's apartment, she was immediately greeted by the warm buzz of conversation and laughter. The group was lively and the food smelled delicious. Ava felt a bit out of place at first, but after a couple of drinks and a few polite conversations, she began to relax. It was then that she noticed him, Ryan. He was standing near the kitchen, laughing at something one of the guests had said. He wasn't particularly tall, but there was something magnetic about his presence. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and his eyes, warm but sharp, caught hers across the room. Ava's heart skipped a beat, and she immediately looked away, not used to this kind of attention. She had been so focused on herself lately that the idea of being attracted to someone else felt foreign. But there was something about Ryan that made her feel a flicker of excitement. She took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling. But as the evening wore on, she found herself gravitating toward him. They ended up in a small group by the balcony, chatting about their favorite books and movies. Ryan was easy to talk to, and there was an effortless connection between them. They laughed easily, the conversation flowing naturally. "So, what do you do?" Ava asked, her curiosity piqued. "I'm a graphic designer," Ryan replied, his smile genuine. "I work freelance mostly, which gives me the freedom to travel. But lately, I've been focusing more on personal projects." "That sounds amazing," Ava said, intrigued. "I've always wanted to travel more, but it's hard to find the time with work and everything." "You should go for it," Ryan said with a playful wink. "The world isn't going to wait for you to catch up." Ava chuckled, her gaze meeting his. "Maybe I will. I'm starting to think it's time for me to do something different." Ryan's smile softened, and there was something in his eyes, something that made Ava wonder if he could see the change in her, the new determination in her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt like someone was seeing her for who she was, not who she had been with Ethan. They talked late into the evening, and when it was time to leave, Ryan offered to walk her to her car. As they stood outside, the night air cool against her skin, he turned to her with a slight smile. "It was really nice meeting you, Ava," he said. "I hope we can do this again sometime." Ava felt her heart race, unsure of what she was feeling. Was it just the excitement of being out in the world again, or was there something more? "Yeah," she said softly, "I'd like that." Ryan reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to her with a smile. "If you ever want to grab a coffee or talk about your next big adventure, just let me know." Ava took the card, her fingers brushing his for a brief moment. It was an innocent gesture, but it sent a thrill through her. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed that feeling, the excitement of meeting someone new, the possibility of what could come next. As she drove home, her thoughts were a whirlwind. Ryan was kind, genuine, and seemed interested in her as a person, not just as the woman who had been cheated on. And for the first time in a long time, Ava felt hopeful. hopeful that there was something beyond the heartbreak, something beyond the pain. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she was ready to find out. The days after the dinner party felt like a quiet, exhilarating rush for Ava. She found herself replaying the conversation with Ryan over and over in her mind. It wasn't just the ease of their connection that had her captivated, it was the way he made her feel seen. He didn't know about her past, about Ethan, about the mess she had been through. And maybe that was what made it so refreshing. There were no expectations, no assumptions, just two people talking, getting to know each other. Ava debated for days whether or not she should reach out to Ryan. Part of her wanted to keep the momentum going, to see where this could lead, but another part of her hesitated. She had spent so much of her life trying to fix things for others, always second-guessing herself. Could she really open up again? Could she risk it? In the end, it was Olivia who nudged her in the right direction. "Ava, if you don't take chances, you'll never know what could happen," she had said one afternoon, after a long conversation about relationships, moving on and starting fresh. "You've spent so long healing from the past. You deserve a little fun, and if it's not right, you'll know." It was exactly the push Ava needed. She took a deep breath, grabbed her phone, and sent a simple text to Ryan. "Hey, this is Ava from the party. I had a great time talking to you. Would you want to meet up for coffee sometime?" Her finger hovered over the send button for a moment before she pressed it. Her heart thudded in her chest as she set the phone down, trying to act casual as she went about her day. The wait felt agonizing, but not long after, her phone buzzed with a reply. "Hey, Ava, I'd love to. How about Saturday afternoon?" A smile spread across her face. She quickly responded with an enthusiastic "Saturday works" and added a little heart emoji for good measure. The exchange felt like a small victory for her, a sign that she was stepping into a new chapter, one where she could open herself to possibilities without the weight of past betrayals holding her back. Saturday arrived with the promise of something new, something uncharted. Ava picked a cozy cafe on the corner of her street, a place that was quiet enough for a conversation, but still vibrant enough to feel like the world was going on around her. She arrived early, wanting to settle in and gather her thoughts before Ryan arrived. She hadn't been on a casual date in so long, and even though it wasn't about dating him per se, there was still a nervous excitement bubbling inside her. When Ryan walked in, he immediately spotted her. His grin was wide and warm, and he waved as he made his way over. "Hey, Ava, good to see you." Ava smiled back, feeling the flutter of anticipation in her chest. "Hey, Ryan, it's nice to see you too. How have you been?" "Busy with work, but it's been good. And you?" Ava shrugged, settling into the easy rhythm of their conversation. "I've been doing well, just focusing on getting back into the swing of things." They ordered coffee, and the next hour passed in a blur of shared stories, laughter, and that same natural connection they had felt at the dinner party. They talked about everything: Ryan's recent travels, Ava's childhood memories, their favorite hobbies, and inevitably, the question of relationships came up. "So, have you been dating at all since?" Ryan trailed off, unsure if it was too soon to ask. Ava paused, taking a sip of her coffee before setting it down. "No, I've been more focused on myself lately. It's been a strange few months, honestly." Ryan nodded, his expression understanding. "I get that. Sometimes you just need time to figure things out, right?" Ava smiled, grateful for his sensitivity. "Exactly. I think I'm starting to figure out who I am outside of the past, and that's a good place to start." Ryan's eyes softened. "That's really important. I respect that." For a brief moment, Ava allowed herself to feel vulnerable. She wasn't used to opening up this much, especially not with someone she barely knew. But Ryan's presence felt different. There was no judgment in his eyes, just an openness that mirrored her own. They continued their conversation for another hour, the time slipping by unnoticed. When it was finally time to leave, Ryan offered to walk her home. As they stood on the sidewalk outside the cafe, the cool air swirling around them, Ryan turned to her with a smile. "I really enjoyed this, Ava. I'm glad we did this." "Me too," she said, her heart fluttering once more. "It was nice to spend time with someone without all the baggage." Ryan grinned. "Yeah, it's refreshing, isn't it? Let's do it again sometime." Ava felt a spark of excitement. "I'd like that." They exchanged goodbyes, and as Ava walked home, her thoughts raced. Could this be the start of something new? Something different? She had no expectations, no rush, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope for the future. The past, with all its hurt, no longer defined her. She was moving forward, one step at a time. The next few weeks were a mix of small moments of joy, casual meetups with Ryan, long conversations with Olivia, and the quiet peace of living her life on her own terms. Ava knew she wasn't rushing into anything with Ryan. She didn't need to. She was enjoying getting to know him, enjoying her own company, and learning how to build a life she loved again. But more than anything, she had come to realize something powerful. She was enough. She didn't need anyone else to validate her worth. She had already found her own strength. And as she looked forward to the future, she knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning. The months that followed became a tapestry of small victories for Ava. She was moving forward in ways she had once thought impossible. Each day, she found new strength in herself, not just from the relationships she was building with others, but from the relationships she was nurturing with herself. Ryan continued to be a steady presence, not rushing things, but quietly supporting her as she navigated her own healing. It was late spring now, and the days felt long and full of promise. Ava had spent the last several months in a state of quiet but persistent change, and each step forward felt like another piece of the puzzle she was putting together. One where she no longer had to worry about fitting into someone else's idea of who she should be. She had come to realize that the only person she needed to answer to was herself. One afternoon, Ava found herself at the park, sitting on a bench near the water, her mind wandering as she watched children run by, laughing and playing. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to see a message from Ryan. "Hey, I was thinking about you. Want to grab dinner tonight?" A smile tugged at her lips. As much as she had grown accustomed to being on her own, there was something about Ryan that felt right. Not because he was the answer to her loneliness, but because he was someone who respected her space, her past, and the person she was becoming. And maybe that was exactly what she needed in her life right now. She quickly replied, "I'd love to. See you tonight." Dinner was at a small bistro that Ryan had suggested, a quiet, intimate spot that was just the right balance of cozy and chic. Ava arrived first, taking a seat at the table by the window, her thoughts drifting as she waited. It wasn't that she had any grand expectations for the evening, it was just another step, another moment in time to enjoy without pressure. But as she sat there, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for how far she had come. Ryan arrived a few minutes later, his smile warm and easy as he slid into the chair across from her. "Hey," he said softly, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "You look beautiful tonight." Ava felt her cheeks warm, but she smiled back. "Thanks, Ryan. You look great, too." They settled into the rhythm of their usual conversation, talking about everything from work to travel, their favorite music to the books they had recently read. It was comfortable, familiar, and most of all, real. Ava didn't feel any sense of obligation or expectation from Ryan. He made her feel like she could just be herself, and that was something she hadn't realized she had been missing. At some point during dinner, as they shared a dessert and the conversation drifted into more personal territory, Ryan reached across the table, his hand resting gently over hers. "Ava," he began, his voice sincere, "I know we've been taking things slow, and I'm happy with that. But I wanted to say something I think you should hear. You've been through a lot, and I can see how strong you are because of it. I don't want to rush you, and I don't want to make things harder for you, but I really care about you. And I think you deserve someone who will be there for you no matter what." Ava's heart skipped a beat. His words weren't flashy or overly romantic, but they were genuine. They weren't filled with promises of forever, but there was something real about them, something grounded. "I care about you too, Ryan," she replied softly, her fingers curling around his. "More than I've cared about anyone in a long time." Ryan smiled, his expression tender. "Then let's see where this goes. No rush, just us figuring it out together." Ava nodded, her chest feeling full for the first time in a long time. She had learned that healing wasn't linear. It wasn't a straight path, but a series of steps, each one leading her to a new realization about herself. And tonight, she realized something important. She was ready for this. Not because she was healed, but because she was open to the possibility of something real. As they left the bistro, Ryan held the door open for her, and they walked down the street together, their fingers intertwined. Ava's heart was light, but her mind was clear. She wasn't rushing into anything. She wasn't trying to fill the void that had once been so consuming. She was simply living in the moment. And for the first time in a long time, Ava felt complete, not because she had someone else beside her, but because she had finally learned how to be whole on her own. Weeks passed, and Ava continued to grow in her own independence. She and Ryan spent more time together, but there were no grand declarations, no promises made too soon. They were two people building something from the ground up at their own pace. Ava's life felt balanced. Her career was thriving, her friendships were strong, and the scars from her past were no longer as sharp. She had healed, but more than that, she had learned how to embrace the person she had become in the process. As she sat in her apartment one evening, sipping tea and reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point, she realized that she had found something invaluable in herself: peace. She had peace with the past, with the hurt, with the lessons learned. And she had peace with the person she was now, the woman who was capable of loving herself fully, of loving others without fear or hesitation. And if there was one thing Ava knew for sure, it was this: life wasn't about waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect person. It was about showing up, day after day, and trusting that the right things would come in time. The future was unwritten, but Ava was no longer afraid of what it held. She was ready for whatever came next.